welcome to a new episode of Incubate, where you can follow us as we make a software MVP in 60 days, and presented by me, Matt Ferrugia. And just in case you have no idea what I'm talking about, what is Incubate? Well, Incubate is a product we're going to make, which is going to become the place where product managers define software products. So this is currently day 3 of our journey. It's the end of day 3. The astute amongst you might be thinking, hey, Matt, where was, you did a day 1 video and this is day 3. Where's the day 2 video? I am not going to do a video every day. I would basically spend 60 days making videos. So probably 2 or 3 videos a week. See how we go. And maybe we'll start splitting them up if the content's too long, and shorter content would go down better. But as it stands, this is a day 3 video covering the stuff we've done since the last video you saw at the end of day 1. So first of all, let's cover some feedback. So amazingly, I got some feedback. I had fully 3 pieces of feedback on the first video, which I'm delighted about. 2 of them were logistics, and 1 was a kind of substantive point. So I'll cover the logistics first. I had somebody ask me, will there be a place where you can make a mailing list or similar so that we know when videos come out? And the answer to that is yes, I actually already have, but it is quite well hidden, so I'll cover that in a few minutes. The second question I was asked was, hey, is this going to become a podcast at some point? Now, I totally accept there is a lot of talking on this series of videos. Potentially in the future, I will turn that into a podcast. It really depends on how much we get into further down the line, actually looking at visuals. And I'll do my best to describe those visuals, but I'm just not convinced that will necessarily translate over to a podcast. Furthermore, there just really isn't enough of an audience yet, and I'm sure there will be, to justify doing that. But that's a potential I can definitely see as a definite maybe. Put it down for that. So the third thing, the substantive piece of feedback. So I got this from Neil McIntosh. Neil's a designer I know, and he said, hey, I like the idea, follow along, brilliant, but concerned that maybe we're depreciating the role of design in product creation, especially this product, as design and product management are so closely linked. Now, that's great feedback. I mean, first of all, let me just say, please give me your feedback. One of the points of doing this in kind of pseudo real time is I can take feedback like that and I can respond on the videos and where I think that's appropriate. And this is one of those cases because I do really want to kind of hammer home. I'm not trying to, with this series of videos, especially at the start, I'm not trying to say you can do product management without user experience design. I don't believe it. And actually what you'll see is some of the pain that we're experiencing is because we're trying to do this in a slightly different way. And why are we trying to do it in a different way? There's kind of 3 reasons. Reason 1, we're trying to get to product realization quite early because we want you to be able to see what we're doing, and we want you to be able to see the product as early as possible so we can build the product with the product. And reason 2 is, I think I touched on this in the last video, we have a logistical constraint. Our usual designer is not available. She is doing some other work that's a higher priority at the moment because that work is handover, and she's going to be traveling in South and Central America. So she's not going to be phoning in designs from Machu Picchu anytime soon. And the third reason we have is that the pile of money is already burning in terms of the engineering team available to work on this. Again, I think I said this last week, it's a terrible, terrible reason to do anything. But the truth is we have engineering available now. We need to get to the stage where they can be doing something useful. And so we've kind of swapped things around a little bit. We will definitely be doing parts of the user experience process. I think that's you'll start to see that as we go along. It's incredibly important. If we build something that users don't want, however good a proxy we are, we will almost certainly fail. So look out for that. We'll come back to some of that stuff and do it. In actual fact, I think possibly what Neil was kind of angling at is don't you see user experience as part of product management? Could it be potentially be part of this tool? And that's definitely something that we have looked at already. It's on my outline research document that's potentially some of the features this could touch on. How much we go into that, I haven't quite decided yet. We haven't decided yet. We shall see. In terms of this project, in terms of getting this kind of first MVP done, I suspect we'll be bitten much more by visual design in the short term. And you will see some of that pain potentially a little bit later on in this episode. But yeah, so there we go. So thank you for those questions. It was a great question, and we'll move on based on that slightly feeble answer. But there we go. Day 3 to do. Okay, what did I want to get done, and in fact get done on days 2 and 3? Well, we have done some early marketing, which I think this video or the previous video is part of, and a website to support that. So that's the kind of bare minimums, but we've done some of that. We have made our stack decisions. We started to build, and we have done a design for the first screen, and I will give you a sneak peek at that at the end of this video. So definitely do hang around for that final video, or you could just skip to the end. But we will be seeing the first screen that we're going to put together. So let's talk about the stack. The stack metaphor, obviously, most of you hopefully listening will be sort of familiar with this, but I mean, in tech businesses is essentially the concept that you build in layers on top of other people's capabilities and solutions. So right these days, you probably wouldn't worry about how you're going to configure and create servers to host yourself. You would use somebody else's solution for that. On top of that, you might use a layer supporting persistence like database stuff, etc., etc. So I think this is quite an interesting thing to look at quite early. We have a particular part of this which you will see is unusual, and it's been chosen for some pretty good reasons, but I'm not definitely sure we're making the right choice here. So I think it's worth talking about Stack. It's a little bit techie. I do appreciate that. Hopefully the people watching this, listening to this, are a mix of techie and non-techie people. So I'll try and make it interesting for both groups of people. But let's have a look at it. So this is a simplified version of what our stack is. In you can see here at the bottom, we've got kind of let's go to the top. Let's go top to bottom. So the application that you'll interact with is a web app. It'll be written in React. That's kind of flavor of the month, flavor of the 6 months, maybe flavor of the last 2 years. I'm not quite sure. But that's what we're building, a JavaScript client-side JavaScript framework called React. And then we'll obviously be serving that React from some sort of web server with some caching probably from Redis. And then what the front-end React JavaScript app will speak to is an API layer. So I didn't come across this phrase until the other day. Maybe it's not widely known, but I was looking around and I came across this thing called the Jam stack. So J for JavaScript, A for API, and M for, what was M for again? M for markup. Yeah, that's what it was. So it's this kind of concept that, a lot of modern apps get written now with a front side, a client side, front end JavaScript library, and it speaks to an API and it vends kind of markup. So yeah, that's cool. That's what we want to do too. I mean, in terms of what's important here, clearly the choice of React is important. And the choice of API, so having APIs as a kind of primary feature of our stack is really important. It means that we can integrate potentially further down the line. So if we build against our API, it kind of gets us 3/4 of the way towards having other people integrate with us. So that's pretty important. I think that's a decent choice. It does actually, it happens to exclude some of the other choices that we might have chosen. So, and the main one is, it sort of excludes for us using a database replication layer where all the functions of updating the database, adding new stuff, deleting stuff, that could potentially all be outsourced to another part of the stack with our replication technology. But if we're going to do an API based thing, that's probably not going to be the case. Okay, so there's the top of our stack. Next down, where is our API actually hosted, and how do we write the app logic? That's going to be written in Node. We'll probably use Express or some sort of hardened Express solution. That's just basically a web server. That's what kind of you think of it with some app logic. A web server, a kind of application server that takes web requests into it. That's a better way to say it. I'm not a web developer, so apologies if any web developers out there are screaming at me. Right. So far, so absolutely bog standard. That's how a lot of startups will be putting together a kind of quick solution. In terms of how they might host them, they might do some kind of quick and dirty things, but typically they'll be eventually migrating to some sort of solution that is deployed on Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or maybe Google Cloud Platform, something like that. You want basically an elastic compute solution that allows you to scale horizontally with this kind of stack. Now, this is absolutely vanilla. There's nothing clever here at all. Some people would argue this is maybe not scalable. They might argue it's not fit for purpose. Whatever. It's quick and it's going to do a good solution and you can scale it pretty far. So where the scaling kind of runs into problems is typically at the next level down. And that next level down is, we're not even going to talk really about hardware here. It'll all be running on Linux, probably in a container and Docker or something like that. But I don't even care about that. That for me is just total table stake stuff. Now, where the choices, or if you're creating your own sort of technical startup or product startup, where the choices really come to bear are what you're going to do at the persistence layer. So how are you going to store your data? And for us, that's actually kind of an interesting choice. So normally we'd have, I don't know, at the bottom you might have some sort of key value database system like MongoDB. Like I said before, you might use database replication if you didn't want to have an API stuck in the middle, and that's phenomenal because a lot of the tough engineering around things that are not really business value, handling conflicts, etc., that kind of goes away if you use somebody else's solution. Of course, if it has problems, it comes back and it can potentially bite you badly. But yeah, and then the kind of vanilla stuff is you just use a standard relational database, SQL or something, Postgres or something like that. So we're not going to do that. I think, I'm not sure. I think we're not going to do that, okay? And you can see here that we've got, below our app logic, we have what I'm calling the Git stack. And that's a Git service speaking to Git sitting on top of file system servers. So this is weird, right? This is not a common thing to do unless you're running a competitor to GitHub or Bitbucket or something, right? So if you wanted to become an alternative to those solutions, then for sure it would look something like this. But we are not doing that. So you're probably sitting there thinking, Matt, what is this? This is really stupid. This is super weird. Why on earth do you think having Git underneath this is a good idea? And the truth is, I don't know if it's a good idea, but let me tell you why I think it might be a good idea. It's not my good idea, by the way. Somebody else, David, in our company came up with this suggestion. Why it might be a good idea is because fundamentally, if you think about what we're trying to do here, we're trying to do, you create features, and the features kind of go through a process. And if you think back to the other day, we had the video on day one, we had a couple of primary features we wanted to do. One thing was we wanted to have the history and traceability of when things changed. And the second thing we wanted to have was we wanted to be able to have an approval process. And this is where David piped up, and David said, I'm thinking like an approval process, a bit like we do when we're developing code. We do things called pull requests. It's just dawned on me, actually. I haven't explained what Git is. Maybe people don't know what Git is. Git is a source code management solution that is very prevalent in the world for any non-techies out there. It's, it's a kind of, instead of changing code by just kind of like saving version 1, version 2, version 3 onto your file system, this allows you to save on top of the previous version, and it kind of tracks all the changes, and it allows developers to work simultaneously in the same code base without kind of stomping all over each other's toes. So it's a kind of primary, absolutely must-have feature of modern software development, the ability to have some sort of control over your source code and source code management. In the last, X number of years, 5 years or something, The one that's become totally dominant is called Git. It was created in part and completely, I don't know how much, but it was originally written anyway by Linus Torvalds, the guy who wrote Linux. And it's, yeah, as I say, it's almost completely taken over the world of preferred source code management solutions. And within that, that kind of it's actually distributed, so you don't have to have a central server to do it. But as is the way of the world, even though it doesn't have to be centralized, a central system has kind of won out the day. Not from a practical purpose, it's still distributed, but everybody kind of goes back and speaks to a central place for it to be hosted in the cloud. And there are a few different vendors in this place, in the space rather, but the one that you've possibly heard of is called GitHub. It was bought by Microsoft for some amount of money, I can't remember, that has billions in it, I'm quite sure. So yeah, that's what Git is. And for us, when you're doing, one of the things that made GitHub kind of famous was when you want to make a change to code that you kind of want to control, they have this thing called a pull request. So you sort of say, hey, I want my changes to be merged back in with everybody else's code, and can you have a look over it and make sure it's okay, and can you approve it? And you send out one or more approvers to say, yep, this looks good to me, and you get the tick from them, and then that code automatically gets merged back together. So David's clever point was, well, if we're going to do a kind of approval process, could we do an approval process that's sort of like when you do a pull request with Git? And that kind of got my head sort of turning, made me think about it. And it's definitely the case that if you want to have an approval process, and if you want to have history as a primary feature and change as a primary feature, then Git is a reasonable solution. So that kind of got me 2/3 of the way there. And then I kind of thought, you know what else Git gives you? Git gives you by default, it gives you a conflict resolution and merge strategy. And I am done. I am done with writing my own or our own database conflict resolution code. It's one of these areas, if you're working in a development team and you're thinking about writing your own database system for doing kind of distributed state that has to be merged back into the same place and has kind of eventual consistency, and you think that's just a kind of side feature of your app logic, then I would strongly recommend you think again and go and look at some cap theorem documents or something like that, because it's just an enormous amount of work. It's a pretty hard problem to get perfect. You'd be much better standing on the shoulders of giants. And that's why database replication is a kind of attractive proposition if you have the potential for multiple people changing state simultaneously. In fact, in this case, I think that's probably quite a low possibility, because everyone will effectively be changing data live, because it's a web service, so it'll be online and live most of the time. So I think the possibility of conflict resolution is quite low. But having said that, it's nice to have a predefined strategy potentially in place, and that's what Git gives us. So we've kind of moved forward with this idea that we'll at least trial the stack, initially sitting on top of Git. It went through my mind to begin with to sort of make this a marketing feature, to sort of say to people, do you know what's so great about this is that the whole thing's built on top of Git, which means that you've got data portability. It's just ultimately text files that you can get out at the end. And I initially, my brain, the engineer side of my brain, let's face it, said to me, hey, that's a really good idea. Let's do that. People will think we're terribly, terribly clever if we tell them that. And then the other side of my brain thought, you know what? No one cares. Certainly not the product managers who'll be using this. That's not a feature that they actually care about. It doesn't differentiate us. It's basically, well, so what? Does it work or does it not work? So I think we'll probably keep this on the Qt under the hood. I don't think anybody needs to know. Obviously, I'm telling everybody now. I would say it's about a 50-50 chance that by the time we launch this MVP, it has moved away from Git underneath, because it's just not that common to do. So I don't want us to be inventing solutions here. So we'll see how far we can get. and see if this works. The metaphor might break down pretty quickly. So essentially, that's us. It's the Jam stack and the Git stack, and then a bit of app logic in the middle. And this is very, very common these days, that when you're creating a new product, you really don't want to be inventing this whole stack. You want to be borrowing other people's technology who have spent more time. Most of this is, if not all of this, is open source, and they've got really good solutions that we can use here. So that's what we're going to do. Just to kind of paint a slightly more realistic picture, excuse me while I make a mess of going through the slides again. One of these days I'll tell you why I'm not just presenting this full screen, but today is not that day. So in actual fact, our stack there'll be more to our stack than that piece I just showed you. What will probably sit on the side is some platform as a service, PaaS, platform as a service solutions. So this is where there are services out there which will do things like they'll provide user registration and user authentication, and they might allow you to send emails. They might allow you to have some sort of database solution, a key value store database solution that scales, etc., etc. We don't really, in the early days, want to be building all that stuff if we can help it, because it's table stakes. It's really not differentiating anything we do. So we will probably end up leaning. I don't fundamentally believe that our entire persistence strategy is we're not going to get away with Git for everything. There is going to have to be some stuff, although, you might not know this, but Git has a feature called Notes, which you can basically dump anything into alongside any commit, so you can store metadata, but it's not going to be enough for the sort of kind of app layer features we want. We will have to have some sort of database persistence. So I'm imagining that we're just probably going to take this off the shelf now. When I say platform as a service, this could end up being all sort of Amazon Web Services stuff, which is very, very, very loosely platform as a service. It's just services as a service, really. Or it could be something a little bit more high level, like, say, Firebase from Google. And then we will definitely end up with some third-party tools integrating here. So customer support, we are not going to write customer support stuff. We'll use something like Intercom or Zendesk or something like that off the shelf. And then reporting, we're going to want to have, by reporting, I really mean error reporting there, but I guess it didn't fit in the box. Something like Sentry, which is an amazingly useful tool for us to just get visibility. And there's other stuff here related to DevOps, monitoring, etc., that we'll probably have. But just to give you a feel, there'll be third-party solutions that we mix in here. Billing, there's another one I haven't even talked about. Then we'll have some platform as a service type high-level functionality that we'll just use because it's not really important to our application stack, but it has to be mixed in there. And then we'll have our application stack, which is pretty bog standard, except we've got this weird Git layer at the bottom end. So there we go. If you have any questions about the stack, please do fire them to me. If you sort of think, why have you chosen this? If you are an expert in Git right now and you're saying, you don't know this, Matt, but this is the worst idea you've ever had, please do reach out to me. Leave a comment on the video, and I will read that and I will feed it back to the dev team.